The blizzard hit without warning that December night, turning the world into a whiteout nightmare that would test the very limits of human compassion. Wind howled like banshees through the empty hospital parking lot, and the temperature had plummeted to 15 below zeroâ, the kind of cold that could kill within minutes. But what happened next would prove that sometimes angels wear leather jackets, ride Harleys, and answer prayers you never thought to pray. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Martinez was 8 months pregnant and had just finished the most grueling 16-hour shift of her nursing career in the pediatric ICU. She was a woman who dedicated her life to saving children, fighting for the smallest and most vulnerable patients when no one else would. But on this frozen December night, she would discover that she needed saving herself. If you believe in unexpected heroes, in the power of human kindness when it matters most, and in the truth that family isn't always about bloody euro, sometimes it's about people who show up when the world has abandoned you euro. Please take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will restore your faith in humanity when you need it most. This is a story about a pregnant nurse who thought she was going to die alone in a frozen parking lot, and how 250 Hell's Angels proved that brotherhood means never letting that happen. Not on their watch. Not ever. To understand what happened that December night, you need to know who Sarah Martinez really was. At 28 years old, she was the kind of nurse that parents specifically requested for their sick children. She had gentle hands that could start an IV on a premature baby weighing less than 2 pounds, and a voice that could calm a terrified toddler facing surgery. Sarah had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until she aged out of the system at 18 with nothing but a backpack and an unshakable determination to make something of her life. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college, then nursing school, studying by candlelight when the electricity got shut off, sleeping in hospital break rooms between shifts when she couldn't make rent. But Sarah never complained. Every struggle had taught her something valuable about resilience, about fighting for what mattered. When she finally earned her pediatric nursing certification and landed her dream job at Mercy General's Children's ICU, she thought the hardest part of her life was behind her. Then she met David Rodriguez. He was a paramedic at Euro, charming, attentive, everything Sarah thought she wanted in a partner. For 8 months, he made her feel like maybe she deserved to be loved, maybe she could finally have the family she'd always dreamed of. When Sarah told him she was pregnant, she expected celebration, maybe even a proposal. Instead, David's face went pale. "I'm not ready for this," he said, backing toward the door of her apartment. "I never said I wanted kids. This is too much, Sarah. I'm sorry." He left that night and never came back. Blocked her number, quit his job, disappeared like he'd never existed. Sarah spent the first trimester of her pregnancy crying herself to sleep, but by the second trimester, something harder had settled in her chest. Fine. She'd done everything else alone euro, she could do this too. The pregnancy had been difficult from the start. Sarah developed gestational diabetes, requiring careful monitoring and medication she could barely afford. She had to cut back to part-time hours during her worst morning sickness, which meant falling behind on rent and eating ramen noodles for weeks at a time. But she never missed a prenatal appointment, never skipped her vitamins, never stopped fighting for the little boy growing inside her. Her colleagues at the hospital tried to help when they could. Dr. Patricia Wong, the head of pediatrics, had quietly arranged for Sarah to get discounted prenatal care. Nurse manager Linda Rodriguez, no relation to David, thankfully, had made sure Sarah got the best shifts and never scheduled her for back-to-back doubles during her worst weeks. But as December arrived and her due date approached, Sarah felt more alone than ever. She'd saved enough for basic baby supplies and the security deposit on a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, but just barely. Every penny counted. That's why she'd been working double shifts for the past month, pushing her pregnant body to its limits to build up as much savings as possible before maternity leave. That particular December evening had been especially brutal. The pediatric ICU was full of Euro. A car accident had brought in 3 children, including a 6-year-old girl who reminded Sarah painfully of herself at that age. Scared, alone, clinging to the hand of any adult who showed her kindness. Sarah had stayed 4 hours past her shift to make sure little Emma stabilized, holding her hand through the worst of her pain, singing soft lullabies that her baby seemed to kick along with. By the time Sarah finally clocked out at 11:47 p.m., the first snowflakes were already falling. The weather report had called for light snow, maybe 2 inches. Nothing that would shut down the city or cause real problems. But Mother Nature had other plans. As Sarah pushed through the hospital's employee exit, the wind hit her like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the past hour, and what had started as gentle snowflakes had become a swirling wall of white that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Sarah pulled her thin kota euro, the only one that still fit over her pregnant belly, a euro tighter around herself, and began the steil Dummen Prussians trek across the parking lot. Each step was a struggle. The snow was already knee-deep in places, and the wind whipped it into her face like tiny needles. Her hands, exposed because her only pair of winter gloves had torn weeks ago, were numb within minutes. She was exhausted beyond measure. Her feet, swollen from 16 hours of standing, screamed with every step. Her lower back ached with the kind of deep, grinding pain that comes from carrying an extra 35 pounds while working a physically demanding job. The baby was restless tonight, kicking and squirming as if he sensed his mother's stress. Sarah had parked in the far corner of the lot, in the free section that hospital staff used because the closer spaces cost $5 a dia euro, money she couldn't afford to spend. It had seemed reasonable that morning when the sun was shining and the December weather felt manageable. Now, as she struggled through drifts that were getting deeper by the minute, those extra 200 yards felt like miles. When she finally reached her car, a 5-year-old Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles and a passenger door that only opened from the inside, Sarah felt a surge of relief. Just a few more minutes and she'd be home in her small apartment, running a hot bath and rubbing her aching feet. But when she turned the key in the ignition, instead of the reassuring rumble of an engine starting, she heard only the terrible clicking sound that every car owner dreads. Click, click, click. Nothing. Sarah tried again, pumping the gas pedal, whispering prayers to whatever force might be listening. Click, click, click. The cold had killed her battery, and her phone, which she pulled out with shaking hands, showed no signal bars. The storm was interfering with cell towers, leaving her completely cut off from help. She sat in her freezing car, watching snow pile up on her windshield, and for the first time in years, Sarah Martinez felt true despair. The hospital's main entrance would be locked now, accessible only through the emergency room on the other side of the complex. Even if she could make it that far in this storm, and with her pregnancy, that was a big if. The security guards would just ask her to call someone to pick her up. But there was no one to call. No family, no close friends, no David who might still care enough to venture out in a blizzard for the mother of his child. Sarah was 8 months pregnant, stranded in what was rapidly becoming a life-threatening storm, with no way to get help and nowhere to go. The cold was seeping through the car's thin metal walls. Sarah could see her breath now, little puffs of vapor that reminded her just how quickly the temperature was dropping. She wrapped her arms around her belly, trying to share what little body heat she had with her unborn son, and felt the first real stab of fear. They were going to die out here. Both of them. That's when she heard Euro cutting through the howl of the wind like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, the deep, unmistakable rumble of a motorcycle engine. Through the swirling curtain of snow, a single headlight pierced the darkness like a beacon of hope. The motorcycle that emerged from the storm was massive, a Harley-Davidson Road King that looked like it had been built to conquer highways and weather alike. The rider was equally imposing, a mountain of a man bundled in leather and determination, moving through the blizzard as if the forces of nature were merely an inconvenience. The bike pulled up beside Sarah's car, with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The engine rumbled once more before falling silent, and the rider removed his helmet, revealing a face that told stories of hard living but was softened by something Sarah couldn't quite identify: genuine concern. This was Marcus Bear Thompson, president of the Hells Angels Phoenix chapter, though Sarah didn't know that yet. At 52 years old, Bear was 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and leather, with arms like tree trunks and a beard that was more gray than black these days. His face bore the scars of a life lived without compromise: a scar through his left eyebrow from a bar fight in his 20s, another along his jaw from a motorcycle accident that should have killed him, but didn't. But it was his eyes that would have surprised anyone who only knew Bear by reputation. They were kind eyes, the eyes of a man who'd seen enough pain in the world to recognize it instantly in others. And right now, those eyes were focused entirely on the pregnant woman shivering in the broken-down Honda. Bear had been riding home from the most difficult night of his year. Every December 15th, he made the same journey: a solo ride to St. Mary's Cemetery where his son Kevin was buried. 5 years ago, Kevin Thompson had been killed by a drunk driver while walking home from basketball practice. He was 12 years old, the same age as many of the children Sarah cared for in the pediatric ICU. The anniversary of Kevin's death was always the hardest night of Bear's year. He would sit by the grave until midnight, telling his son about the year that had passed, about the things Kevin would never get to experience. Then he would ride home through empty streets, alone with his grief and his guilt and the weight of promises he'd never get to keep. But tonight, the storm had forced him to take a different route. Instead of the highway, he'd been navigating back roads, and a wrong turn had brought him past Mercy General just as Sarah's shift was ending. He'd been focusing on the road ahead when he noticed the lone car in the far corner of the parking lot, hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. Bear's first instinct was to keep riding. He had his own demons to wrestle with tonight, his own pain to process. But as he got closer, something made him slow down. Maybe it was the way the car sat motionless while snow piled up around it. Maybe it was the hazard lights, that universal signal for help. Or maybe it was something else: a voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like his son's, asking him what kind of man he wanted to be. He pulled up beside the Honda and immediately saw the problem. A young woman, heavily pregnant, sitting in a car that clearly wasn't starting. Her face was pale with cold and fear, and she was hugging herself in a way that suggested she was trying to share warmth with the baby she carried. Bear knocked gently on her window, careful not to startle her. When Sarah looked up at Haima, this massive, intimidating biker appearing out of the storm like something from a nightmare, he saw her fear and immediately understood. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from years of shouting over motorcycle engines, but deliberately gentle. "You having car trouble?" Sarah hesitated. Everything she'd ever been taught about personal safety screamed warnings. This was exactly the kind of situation her mother when she'd had one and had warned her about. Strange men in isolated places, especially men who looked like this one. But something in his demeanor, the way he kept his distance and spoke softly, suggested genuine concern rather than threat. She rolled down her window just enough to talk, snow immediately swirling into the car. "My battery's dead," she said, her voice shaking from cold rather than fear now. "And my phone won't work in this storm." Bear nodded, understanding the full scope of the problem immediately. Dead car, no communication, pregnant woman, worsening blizzard. This was a life-threatening situation developing in real time. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching down to her level to seem less intimidating. "Sarah Martinez. I'm a nurse here just finished my shift." "Well, Sarah Martinez, I'm Bear Thompson, and you're not spending another minute out here in this cold. How far along are you?" 8 months, Sarah replied, and Bear saw her hand move protectively to her belly. Bear stood up, his mind already working through solutions. This woman needed help, and she needed it now. The temperature was still dropping, the storm was getting worse, and sitting in a dead car in these conditions was essentially a death sentence. He pulled out his phone, somehow managing to get a weak signal despite the storm, and made a call that would change everything. "Phoenix Clubhouse, this is Bear," he said into the phone, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed instantly. "I need immediate emergency assistance at Mercy General Hospital. Pregnant nurse stranded in the storm. Vehicle disabled, life-threatening situation. I need the van, medical supplies, and every available member. This is not a request to Euro. This is a priority 1 rescue operation." The response was immediate. "Copy that, press. How many you need?" Bear looked around at the storm, calculating distances and dangers. "Everyone. Every last one of you. And bring the winter gear Euro, we're going to be out here for a while." Within minutes, Sarah could hear them coming. At first, it was just a low rumble underneath the wind, so faint she thought she might be imagining it. But the sound grew steadily louder, more defined, until it was unmistakably the sound of multiple motorcycles moving in formation. "They're coming," Bear said, watching her face for signs of panic. "My brothers. They're good people, Sarah. Every last one of them. Nobody's going to hurt you, and nobody's going to let anything happen to you or your baby. I give you my word." There was something in the way he said "I tain Euro." Not just the words, but the absolute conviction behind them a Euro that made Sarah believe him. This wasn't empty reassurance. This was a promise from a man who didn't make promises lightly. What emerged from that blizzard was something Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. Not one motorcycle, not a handful, but what seemed like an endless stream of bikes cutting through the snow like mechanical cavalry. The rumble grew from distant thunder to an earth-shaking roar as motorcycle after motorcycle materialized through the white wall of the storm. They came from every direction a Euro, 97 Hells Angels members who had dropped everything and ridden through near whiteout conditions because their president had called for help. These weren't fair-weather riders or weekend warriors. These were men and women who live by the code that when a brother calls you answer, no matter the cost, no matter the danger. Leading the pack was a converted medical transport van with snow chains and emergency lights, followed by pickup trucks with winches and recovery gear. Behind them came the motorcycles, Euro Harleys and Indians and custom choppers, all equipped with snow tires and driven by riders who knew how to handle their machines in any conditions. Maven Rodriguez was the first off her bike, a 68-year-old grandmother who'd been riding with the Angels for over 30 years. Despite her age, she moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to emergency situations. She'd been a military medic in Vietnam before she was a biker, and those skills had never left her. "Transport's ready," she called to Bear, already opening the van's doors to reveal an interior that had been converted into a mobile medical unit. Heated blankets, emergency supplies, even oxygen tanks a Euro, everything needed to stabilize someone in medical distress. Diesel Martinez a Euro, no relation to Sarah despite the shared last name a Euro, was a mountain of a man who ran a construction company when he wasn't riding with the Angels. He immediately began directing traffic, organizing the other bikers into a protective perimeter around Sarah's car while creating a path to the medical van. "Form up," he shouted over the wind. "I want a windbreak around the vehicle, and I want volunteers to carry supplies. Move with purpose, people a Euro. We've got a pregnant woman in distress." Reaper Johnson, whose real name was Marcus and who taught high school math during the week, was already on his phone with the hospital. Despite his intimidating road name, he was the club's liaison with local authorities and medical facilities, the one who handled emergencies that required official cooperation. "This is Marcus Johnson with the Phoenix Angels," he said to the emergency room supervisor. "We have a pregnant nurse stranded in your parking lot, approximately 8 months along, showing signs of hypothermia. We're initiating immediate transport and will need obstetric staff standing by." The coordination was flawless, the result of years of riding together and handling emergencies as a unit. These weren't the dangerous criminals that movies and media portrayed. These were mechanics and teachers, construction workers and small business owners, veterans and grandparents a Euro, people who understood that loyalty meant everything and that family came first, always. Phoenix Williams, a former Army medic turned auto mechanic, approached Sarah's car with a medical kit and the gentle demeanor of someone trained to handle trauma victims. "Ma'am, I'm Phoenix, and I need to check your vitals before we move you. Is that okay?" Sarah nodded, still overwhelmed by the sight of nearly 100 bikers who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. Phoenix's examination was professional and thorough. Checking her pulse, blood pressure, signs of hypothermia or fetal distress. "Baby's heartbeat is strong," he reported back to Bear, using a portable fetal monitor Maven had produced from the medical van. "Mom's showing early signs of hypothermia, but nothing critical yet. We need to get her warmed up and stable." The transfer to the van was handled with military precision. 6 bikers formed a human shield around Sarah's car, blocking the wind while others helped her from the Honda to the heated medical transport. Every movement was careful, deliberate, designed to minimize stress on both mother and baby. Inside the van, Sarah found herself surrounded by warmth and competence. Maven wrapped her in heated blankets that had been warming in the van's heating system, while Phoenix monitored her vital signs and communicated with the hospital via radio. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "Why are you all helping me? You don't even know me." Maven's weathered face softened into a grandmotherly smile. "Honey, you're carrying a baby. That makes you family. And family takes care of family. That's the only rule that really matters." Bear climbed into the van's passenger seat, turning to face Sarah. "We're taking you inside now, getting you checked out properly. But I want you to know something. This isn't charity, and it's not pity. This is what we do. When someone needs help, we help. When someone's in danger, we protect them. That's the code we live by." Through the van's windows, Sarah could see the other bikers maintaining their positions around the parking lot, creating a protective perimeter that would ensure her safe passage to the hospital. Some were directing traffic, others were organizing the recovery of her Honda, and still others were simply standing guard against the storm. "How many of you are there?" she asked, still trying to process what was happening. 97 active members," Bear replied. "And every last one of them will stay here until we know you and your baby are safe. That's what brotherhood means to Nobody gets left behind, not ever." As the van pulled up to the emergency entrance, Sarah realized that something extraordinary was happening. These people this brotherhood she'd only known through stereotypes and news stories. They'd seen her not as a burden or a victim, but as someone worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open and warm air rushed into the van. But it wasn't just the temperature that had changed. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Martinez wasn't facing a crisis alone. The emergency room at Mercy General had seen its share of unusual situations over the years, but the arrival of 97 Hells Angels members accompanying a pregnant nurse was definitely a first. The night staff already on edge due to the blizzard and the influx of weather-related emergencies wasn't quite sure how to process what they were seeing. Dr. Rachel Kim, the attending physician in emergency obstetrics, had been briefed by Reaper's phone call, but seeing the situation firsthand was something else entirely. Here was Bear Thompson 6 feet 4 inches of leather and intimidation carefully helping a pregnant woman out of a medical transport van with the gentleness of a trained caregiver. "I'm Dr. Kim," she said, approaching the group with professional composure despite her curiosity about the unusual circumstances. "You must be Sarah. Let's get you inside and properly examined." "I'll be in the waiting area," Bear said, squeezing Sarah's hand once before stepping back. "But Dr. Kim," surprised him. "Actually, if you're her support person, you're welcome to stay with her during the initial examination. That is, if Sarah's comfortable with that." Sarah looked at Bear this man who'd appeared out of nowhere to save her life and nodded. "I'd like that. There's no one else." The examination revealed what Phoenix's roadside assessment had suggested. Sarah was showing early signs of hypothermia. Her blood pressure was elevated from stress, and the baby was showing some signs of distress likely from the cold and Sarah's physical exhaustion. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require observation and treatment. We're going to admit you overnight for monitoring, doctor, Kim explained. The hypothermia is mild, but we want to make sure both you and the baby stabilize completely. Given your pregnancy status and the stress you've been under, it's the safest course of action. As they moved Sarah to a maternity ward room, Bear walked alongside the gurney, his presence somehow both protective and comforting. The nursing staff at Euro, many of whom knew Sarah from her work in pediatrics at Euro, were amazed by the transformation they were witnessing. Sarah, who always seemed so alone and self-contained, had somehow acquired a guardian angel who happened to ride a Harley. Once Sarah was settled in her room, connected to monitors that tracked both her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat, Bear took a seat in the uncomfortable plastic chair that every hospital seems to furnish its rooms with. His massive frame looked almost comical in the tiny chair, but he showed no signs of leaving. "You don't have to. Stay," Sarah said, though her voice suggested she hoped he would. "I'm sure you have better things to do than sit in a hospital room all night." Bear's expression grew serious. "Sarah, let me tell you something about the night you met me. Today is December 15th. 5 years ago today, my son Kevin was killed by a drunk driver. He was 12 years old, walking home from basketball practice, doing everything right, and some piece of garbage who'd had too much to drink ran him down and left him to die in the street." Sarah's hand went to her throat, her eyes filling with tears for this man's loss. "Every year on this date, I ride alone. I go to his grave, I sit with him, I tell him about the year that passed and all the things he's missing. It's the hardest night of my year, every year. I was riding home from the cemetery when I found you." Bear paused, emotion making his voice rough. Kevin would have been 17 now, about to graduate high school, probably thinking about college, maybe giving me gray hairs over some girl he was sweet on. Instead, I've got an empty house and a grave I visit too often. "Bear, I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "Here's the thing," Bear continued. "When I saw you out there tonight, 8 months pregnant and in trouble, something inside me said this was where I was supposed to be. Not sitting alone feeling sorry for myself, but helping someone who needed help. Maybe Kevin sent me to find you. Maybe it was just chance. But I'll tell you what it wasn't a Euro. It wasn't an accident." Over the next few hours, as the storm raged outside and the hospital settled into its late-night rhythm, Sarah and Bear shared their stories. She learned that this fearsome biker leader was actually a decorated Marine veteran who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, earning a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star before coming home to a country that didn't quite know what to do with its returning veterans. Bear had found his place with the Hells Angels, a brotherhood that understood loyalty and sacrifice in ways that civilian society often didn't. The club wasn't the criminal organization that movies portrayed a Euro. They were a community, a family bound by shared values and mutual support. "We do charity rides," Bear explained. "Toy drives for kids at Christmas, fundraisers for veteran families, blood drives, disaster relief. Last year, we raised $50,000 for the Children's Hospital in Phoenix. The media doesn't report that stuff. A Euro doesn't fit the narrative they want to tell." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would break Bear's heart wide open. "I've been so scared about doing this alone. Not just tonight, but everything. Raising a child, being enough for him. Making sure he grows up knowing he's loved even though his father didn't want him." She gestured to her belly. "I know it's a boy. I was going to name him David after my father a Euro, not that I remember him much. He died when I was 3. Sarah looked at Bear, this man who'd lost his own son and found her on the worst night of her year. "But maybe David Kevin Martinez wouldn't be a terrible name. If you don't mind sharing Kevin's memory with a little boy who's going to need some good examples of what a man should be." Bear's eyes filled with tears he hadn't shed since Kevin's funeral. For 5 years, he'd carried his grief like a stone in his chest, convinced that his son's memory was his burden alone to bear. The idea that Kevin's name a Euro and his memory a Euro could live on in another child, could be part of something hopeful instead of just tragic, was more healing than anything Bear had experienced in 5 years of grieving. "I would be honored," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kevin would have loved that. Outside Sarah's room, the Brotherhood maintained their vigil. The hospital staff had initially been nervous about having so many bikers in their building, but their fears quickly evaporated as they watched the angels in action. These weren't troublemakers a euro. They were visitors who followed hospital rules, spoke respectfully to staff, and seemed genuinely concerned about Sarah's well-being. Maven had somehow produced a cooler full of sandwiches and coffee, turning the waiting area into an impromptu command center where the angels coordinated their response to the crisis. Diesel was on his phone with towing services, arranging for Sarah's Honda to be properly recovered and repaired. Phoenix was liaising with the medical staff, providing his military medical training when needed. But it was what happened around 3 a.m. that truly demonstrated the depth of the Brotherhood's commitment. Word of the Angels' rescue mission had begun to spread through the community via social media and local news outlets that monitored emergency radio frequencies. The story was too compelling to ignore. Nearly 100 bikers risking their lives in a blizzard to save a pregnant nurse they'd never met. By dawn, something remarkable was happening at Mercy General Hospital. The parking lot, which had been empty except for snow-covered cars when Sarah first became stranded, was now filled with vehicles belonging to people who'd come to help. Local businesses began arriving with donations. Murphy's Diner sent over 3 thermoses of coffee and enough breakfast sandwiches to feed everyone. Henderson Auto Parts brought a new battery for Sarah's Honda, refusing payment when Diesel tried to hand over his credit card. "That girl's been through enough," Old Man Henderson said, waving away the money. "Besides, anyone the angels vouch for is good people in my book." The local news stations had picked up the story, and by morning it was trending on social media platforms. Number Angel Riders and Number Pregnant Nurse were generating thousands of shares, comments, and offers of help from strangers around the country. But the most surprising visitor arrived just after sunrise. Hospital Administrator Margaret Foster was a woman in her 60s who'd run Mercy General with an iron fist for the past 15 years. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to hospital policy and her particular intolerance for disruptions to her carefully ordered environment. Under normal circumstances, having 97 bikers camping out in her hospital would have resulted in immediate calls to security and demands for their removal. Instead, she sought out Bear Thompson in the family waiting area. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I'm Margaret Foster, the hospital administrator." Bear stood, unsure whether he was about to be thrown out or arrested. "Ma'am, I wanted to personally thank you and your organization for what you did last night. Sarah Martinez is one of our finest nurses, and what happened to her could have been a tragedy. Because of your actions, both she and her baby are going to be fine." Bear nodded, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I also wanted you to know," Foster continued, "that Mercy General is prepared to provide full medical coverage for Sarah's delivery and postpartum care. We have an employee assistance fund for situations exactly like this." "That's very generous, ma'am." Euro. Foster held up a hand. "It's not charity, Mr. Thompson. It's recognition. Sarah has given years of her life to caring for our sickest children, often staying past her shifts without compensation, going above and beyond in ways that make this hospital better. She's earned our support." Then Foster did something that surprised everyone present. She pulled out a business card and handed it to Bear. "This has my direct number. If your organization ever needs anything from this hospital, euro, medical support for your charity rides, space for fundraising events, whatever euro, you call me directly. What you did last night proves that character isn't about appearance or reputation. It's about actions when no one's watching." As Foster walked away, Maven chuckled from her spot on a nearby couch. "Well, I'll be damned. When's the last time hospital administration thanked bikers for anything?" But the surprises weren't over. Around 10 a.m., as Sarah was being prepared for discharge with a clean bill of health for both her and the baby, Dr. Patricia Wong from the pediatric ICU appeared in her room. "Sarah," Dr. Wong said, "I hope you don't mind, but word of what happened has gotten around the hospital. The pediatric staff has taken up a collection of euro enough to cover your rent for the next 3 months and get you set up with everything you'll need for the baby. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Doctor Wong, I can't accept a euro. Yes, you can. And you will. You've spent the last 3 years going above and beyond for our patients and their families. You've stayed late without being asked, comforted parents during the worst moments of their lives, and never once complained about the extra workload or the emotional toll. This is our turn to take care of you. Dr. Wong handed Sarah an envelope thick with cash and gift cards. There's also a letter in there from the families of some of the children you've cared for. They heard about what happened and wanted you to know how much your kindness has meant to them. By the time Sarah was ready to leave the hospital, she felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from people she'd worked with for years, but never realized cared so deeply about her well-being. But the biggest surprise was waiting for her outside. When Sarah walked out of Mercy General's main entrance, she expected to see Bear waiting with maybe a few of his brothers to give her a ride home. What she found instead was something that would be talked about in the community for years to come. The hospital's circular drive was lined with motorcycles euro, not just the 97 angels who'd rescued her, but bikers from other clubs across the state. Word of the previous night's rescue had spread through the motorcycle community, and riders had come from hundreds of miles away to show their support. But motorcycles weren't the only vehicles present. The parking lot was filled with pickup trucks, SUVs, and vans belonging to volunteers who'd come to help with what Bear called Operation New Beginning. "What's all this?" Sarah asked, still processing the scene before her. Bear's grin was wider than she'd ever seen it. "Well, we figured you might need some help getting ready for little David Kevin's arrival, so the Brotherhood got together and made some arrangements." What followed was a caravan unlike anything the city had ever seen. 97 Hells Angels motorcycles, leading a procession of volunteer vehicles through the streets, all heading towards Sarah's small apartment complex. News helicopters followed overhead, and local television stations provided live coverage of what they were calling the most heartwarming story of the year. When they arrived at Sarah's building, she discovered that the Angels had spent the entire night and morning organizing something incredible. While she'd been in the hospital, teams of volunteers had been working to transform her small apartment into a proper home for a new mother and her baby. The first thing Sarah noticed was her Honda Civic sitting in the parking lot, engine running perfectly. Diesel had not only replaced the battery, but had also performed a complete tune-up, replaced the worn tires, and fixed the passenger door that had been broken for months. "Can't have little David's mom driving around in an unreliable car," he explained with a shrug. But the real transformation was inside her apartment. What had been a barely furnished one-bedroom with hand-me-down furniture and empty walls had become a warm, welcoming home. The living room now featured a comfortable couch, coffee table, and rocking chair euro, all donated by club members and their families. The kitchen was stocked with enough food to last for weeks, including everything needed to prepare healthy meals for a new mother. But it was the nursery that took Sarah's breath away. Her tiny second bedroom had been completely transformed. The walls were painted in soft blue and white, with hand-painted murals of clouds and angels that Maven had created while Sarah was in the hospital. A beautiful oak crib sat in the center of the room, surrounded by a changing table, dresser, and rocking chair euro, all handcrafted by club members who worked in woodworking and furniture making. "Phoenix made the crib," Bear explained, gesturing toward the piece that would have cost Sarah a month's salary in any store. Took him 3 weeks working evenings. Reaper built the changing table, and Diesel's crew painted everything. The closet was filled with baby clothes in every size from newborn to toddler, all donated by club families and community members who'd heard Sarah's story. Diapers, formula, bottles, toys euro, everything a new mother could need was organized and ready. But it was what Sarah found on the nursery's changing table that broke her heart wide open. A small wooden box with David Kevin engraved on the top. Inside were mementos from Bear's Sauna Euro, a baseball card collection, a few favorite books, and a letter Bear had written explaining how Kevin would have loved having a little brother to look after. "I thought he might like to know about the boy he's named after," Bear said quietly. And maybe someday, when David Kevin is old enough to understand, he can know that he carries the memory of someone special. Sarah collapsed into the rocking chair, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly cared for, truly supported. These people this brotherhood she'd been taught to fear had given her more than just material help. They'd given her family. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't thank family," Maven said firmly. "You just accept the love and pass it on when you can." Over the next few weeks, as Sarah prepared for David Kevin's arrival, the angels became a constant presence in her life. Not intrusive or overwhelming, but available. When she needed groceries, someone appeared to drive her to the store. When her back ached from the pregnancy, Maven would show up with healing hands and stories from her own children's births. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bear visited most evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes with other club members. They would sit in the nursery, assembling baby furniture, or just talking about life, loss, and the strange way that fate sometimes brings people together when they need each other most. 3 weeks before Sarah's due date, Bear made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been thinking," he said during one of their evening visits, "about names and legacies and what it means to be family. I know you're planning to name the baby David Kevin, and that means the world to me, but I've been wondering, would you consider letting me be more than just a namesake? Would you let me be his godfather officially?" Sarah looked at this man, who'd appeared out of a blizzard to save her life, and had somehow become the most important person in her world. "Bear, I would be honored, but being a godfather is a big responsibility. It means It means that if anything ever happens to you, David Kevin would never be alone. It means he'd grow up knowing that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about people who choose to love you. It means he'd have 97 uncles and aunts who would make sure he never wanted for anything love, support, guidance, or protection." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded. Yes, I want that for him." 2 weeks later, on a snowy January morning that seemed like destiny coming full circle, Sarah went into labor. The call came to Bear at 4:23 a.m. on January 12th. Sarah's voice was tight with pain, but also excitement. "Bear, it's time." The contractions are 5 minutes apart and getting stronger. Bear was out of bed and dressed in record time, calling Maven and Phoenix as he started his Harley despite the early morning cold. "It's happening. Meet me at Mercy General Euro." Sarah's in labor. What followed was a controlled chaos that would become legend in the Angels community. Word spread through the Brotherhood with the speed of wildfire, and by the time Bear reached the hospital, the parking lot was already filling with motorcycles. But this wasn't the emergency response of 3 weeks earlier. This was a celebration. Maven had somehow procured cigars good once a euro, and was handing them out to anyone who wanted one. Diesel had brought a cooler full of champagne for the moment, when they could toast the baby's arrival. Phoenix was coordinating with hospital staff to make sure everything went smoothly. "How many of you are planning to wait?" the maternity ward nurse asked, slightly overwhelmed by the sight of nearly 100 bikers filing into her waiting area. "All of us," Bear replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "This baby is family." The labor lasted 14 hours long enough for the Angels to transform the hospital waiting room into a command center of support. They took shifts staying with Sarah when she needed company, brought food for the medical staff, and somehow managed to maintain perfect order despite their numbers. Dr. Wong, who was handling the delivery, had never seen anything like it. "In 30 years of obstetrics, I've never had a patient with this much support. It's actually beautiful." At 6:47 p.m., David Kevin Martinez made his entrance into the world, weighing 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and announcing his arrival, with a healthy cry that could be heard down the hallway. Bear was in the delivery room with Sarah, holding her hand through the final pushes, and he was the first person to hold David Kevin after the medical team finished their initial examination. "Hello, little man," Bear whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at the tiny baby in his arms. "I'm your Uncle Bear, and I've got some people who are very excited to meet you." When Bear carried David Kevin out to the waiting room to meet the Brotherhood, the tough bikers who'd seen combat and faced down danger without flinching were reduced to tears by the sight of this tiny baby who represented hope and new beginnings. Maven was the first to hold him after Bear, her experienced grandmother's hands gentle and sure. "Oh, honey," she whispered to the sleeping infant. "You have no idea how loved you are." One by one, 97 Hells Angels took turns holding David Kevin, each making quiet promises about protection and love, and all the adventures that lay ahead. Diesel promised to teach him about engines and how to fix anything that broke. Phoenix vowed to show him how to camp under the stars and find his way in the wilderness. Reaper pledged to help with homework and make sure he understood that education was the key to any future he wanted to build. The scene was captured by a hospital photographer and later made the front page of newspapers across the country. A tiny baby being held by a mountain of a biker with tears streaming down his face, surrounded by 96 other leather-clad angels who had formed an impromptu family around a child who would never lack for love or protection. That night, as visiting hours ended and the angels finally began to disperse, Bear stayed with Sarah and David Kevin. He slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair, waking every time the baby stirred, helping with feedings and diaper changes like he'd been doing it all his life. "You don't have to stay," Sarah told him. During one of the quiet moments between feedings, "You've already done so much." Bear looked down at David Kevin, sleeping peacefully in his arms, and then at Sarah, who had somehow become the daughter he'd never had. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. "This is what family does." 3 days later, when Sarah and David Kevin were discharged from the hospital, they came home to find one final surprise waiting for them. The angels had spent the past 3 days preparing for David Kevin's homecoming, and their preparations went far beyond decorating the nursery. Parked in Sarah's driveway was a brand new SUV, a family-friendly vehicle with excellent safety ratings, all-wheel drive for winter weather, and enough space for car seats and baby equipment. The title was already in Sarah's name. "We can't have you driving around with a baby in that little Honda," Diesel explained when Sarah protested the extravagant gift. "This is a loan from the club. You can pay us back when David Kevin goes to college if it makes you feel better." But the vehicle was just the beginning. Inside the house, Sarah discovered that the angels had established something they called the David Kevin Trust, a college fund that already contained enough money to pay for 4 years at any university in the country. Every angel in the state contributed, Bear explained, plus donations from people who heard your story. Turns out there are a lot of folks who believe in helping when someone needs help. Over the following months, as David Kevin grew from newborn to infant to curious toddler, the angels became a constant presence in their lives. Not overwhelming or intrusive, but available, always available. Sarah returned to work part-time when David Kevin was 6 months old, confident that he was in good hands with Maven, who had volunteered to provide childcare. The arrangement worked perfectly. David Kevin got the attention and love of a devoted grandmother figure, while Sarah maintained her career and independence. Bear became the father figure that David Kevin had never expected to have. He taught the boy to walk, helped with his first words, and was there for every milestone that mattered. When David Kevin took his first steps, it was toward Bear's outstretched arms in Sarah's living room, surrounded by angels who cheered like he'd just won the Olympics. The bond between Bear and David Kevin was evident to everyone who saw them together. The massive, intimidating biker would spend hours on the floor playing with toy cars or reading picture books in different voices. He attended every pediatric appointment, helped with teething troubles, and was Sarah's partner in all the decisions that came with raising a child. "You know," Sarah said one evening as they watched David Kevin sleep in his crib, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for that blizzard. If it hadn't happened, we never would have found you." Bear smiled, remembering the desperate woman he'd found in a broken-down car and how far they'd all come since that night. Sarah I need you to know something. That night I found you, I was at the lowest point I'd been in 5 years. I was so lost in grief for Kevin that I couldn't see any purpose in my life anymore. But finding you, helping you, watching David Kevin grow up Euro, it's given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. The belief that good things can still happen, that love doesn't end when someone dies, and that family is about choice as much as chance. When David Kevin was 2 years old, Bear made a decision that surprised no one who knew the story of how they'd all come together. It happened on December 15th, the third anniversary of the night they'd met. Bear had taken Sarah and David Kevin to the cemetery where his son Kevin was buried, a pilgrimage they'd made together each year since David Kevin's birth. The little boy, now walking and talking, placed a small toy car on Kevin's gravy Euro, a tradition they'd started when he was old enough to understand that Uncle Bear had a special son in heaven who watched over them. Kevin, Bear said, kneeling beside the grave while Sarah and David Kevin stood nearby. It's been 3 years since you sent me to find Sarah and this little guy. I think it's time I made things official. He turned to Sarah, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. The ring inside was simple but beautiful, a euro, a diamond surrounded by small stones that had belonged to his mother. Sarah Martinez, you and David Kevin have given me a reason to believe in tomorrow again. I love you both more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. I know we didn't start this in any conventional way, but there's nothing conventional about love that comes from the heart instead of circumstance. Bear's voice grew thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Will you let me be David Kevin's father? Officially. And will you be my family for whatever time we have left on this earth? Sarah's tears were already flowing as she nodded. Yes, yes, to all of it. David Kevin, not entirely understanding what was happening but sensing the importance of the moment, clapped his hands and shouted, Daddy, at Barry Euro, a word that made the tough biker cry harder than he had since his son's funeral. The wedding 6 months later was unlike anything the community had ever seen. It was held in the hospital's garden, the same place where Sarah had worked for years caring for sick children. Dr. Wong officiated, having become ordained online specifically for the occasion. The guest list included 97 Hells Angels, dozens of hospital staff members, patients and families that Sarah had cared for over the years, and representatives from motorcycle clubs across 3 states who had become part of their extended family. Maven served as Sarah's maid of honor, while Diesel stood up as Bear's best man. David Kevin served as ring bearer, walking down the aisle in a tiny tuxedo with patches that matched his new father's colors. The ceremony itself was a testament to the power of found family. Hospital Administrator Margaret Foster gave a speech about how the marriage represented the best of both worlds. Euro, Sarah's compassion and dedication to healing, combined with the angel's commitment to protection and loyalty. 3 years ago, Foster said, these two people were strangers brought together by circumstances that could have been tragic. Instead, they became proof that family isn't always about bloody Euro. Sometimes it's about people who choose to love you, protect you, and stand by you no matter what life brings. The reception was held in the hospital parking lot where it all began, transformed with lights and flowers into something magical. The Angels had arranged for a local band that played everything from classic rock to children's songs, ensuring that everyone, from toddlers to grandparents, could enjoy the celebration. But it was the speeches that truly captured the meaning of the day. Sarah stood before the assembled crowd, holding David Kevin while Bear stood beside her with his arm around them both. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over, she said, her voice carrying across the parking lot. I was 8 months pregnant, alone, and convinced that nobody cared whether I lived or died. Then a guardian angel appeared out of a blizzard Euro, an angel who happened to ride a Harley and came with 96 friends who believed that family means never letting anyone face their worst moments alone. She looked at Bear, then at the angels, who had become her brothers and sisters. You taught me that love isn't always romantic Euro. Sometimes it's about people who show up when you need them most. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. Bear's speech was shorter, but no less emotional. 5 years ago, I lost my son Kevin, and I thought that was the end of any happiness I'd ever know. But Kevin sent me Sarah and David Kevin, and they taught me that love doesn't end when someone dies a euro. It just finds new ways to grow. Today, I'm not just gaining a wife and son. I'm celebrating the fact that out of the worst night of my life came the best thing that ever happened to me. The celebration continued late into the night, with toasts and stories and promises about the future. When it was finally time for the newlyweds to leave, they did so in a procession of 97 motorcycles, escorting them to their new home a larger house the angels had helped them purchase, with enough room for David Kevin to grow up and maybe, someday, for brothers and sisters to join him. Today, 5 years after that December blizzard, the Martinez Thompson family has become a symbol of hope in their community. Sarah works part-time at the pediatric ICU and part-time managing charitable operations for the Harleys Angels, coordinating their community outreach programs. Bear runs a custom motorcycle shop that employs several club members and has become known for its fair prices and exceptional work. But more importantly, he's found his calling as a father not just to David Kevin, but to the dozens of children who have been helped by the Angels' charitable programs over the years. David Kevin, now 7 years old, is a happy, confident boy who calls 97 bikers uncle and aunt, and who has never known a day when he wasn't surrounded by love and protection. He plays Little League Baseball, with Bear as his coach, excels in school, with Reaper helping with homework, and has already announced his intention to ride motorcycles and help people when he grows up. The family story has inspired a movement within the motorcycle community. The Angel Riders program, that began with Sarah's rescue, has expanded to chapters across the country, helping single mothers, supporting veteran families, and providing disaster relief when communities need it most. Every December 15th, the anniversary of their first meeting, the Martinez Thompson family returns to Kevin's grave to leave flowers and share stories about the year that passed. David Kevin, now old enough to understand the story of how his parents met, always brings a new toy car for the brother he never met, but whose memory is part of his daily life. Will I ever get to meet Kevin? David Kevin asked on this year's visit. Bear knelt down to his son's level, the same way he'd once knelt beside Sarah's car in a blizzard. Someday, buddy. But for now, Kevin is watching over us, making sure we take care of each other the way family should. As they walked back to their car the SUV that had been a wedding gift from the Angels and was now showing signs of a family's busy life Sarah reflected on. The journey that had brought them here. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't taken that wrong turn that night? She asked Bear. Bear looked at David Kevin, who was already planning his next visit to brother Kevin, and at Sarah, who had given him a reason to believe in love again. No, he said simply, because it wasn't a wrong turn. It was the road that led me home. The Hells Angels still gather every few months for rides and charitable events, but now those gatherings include children's laughter and family barbecues. The intimidating biker club has evolved into something deeper a community that proves family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about people who choose to love you when you need it most. And somewhere on the highways of America, other travelers in trouble still find unexpected angels appearing out of storms angels who wear leather and ride Harleys and believe that nobody should ever face their worst moments alone. Because that's what family does. They show up, they protect, they love without conditions. And sometimes, when the world seems coldest and most hopeless, they appear out of nowhere to prove that guardian angels come in all forms even ones that ride motorcycles and keep their promises forever. Through the swirling snow, a single headlight pierced the darkness. A massive Harley-Davidson emerged from the storm like something out of a dream, its rider bundled in leather and determination. The bike pulled up beside Sarah's car, and the rider removed his helmet, revealing a bearded face marked by years of hard living but softened by genuine concern. His name was Marcus Bear Thompson, president of the Hells Angels chapter. At 52, He was a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and a reputation that preceded him wherever he rode. But right now, looking at the pregnant woman shivering in her broken-down car, all he saw was someone who needed help. "Ma'am." His voice was rough but gentle. "You all right out here?" Sarah rolled down her window, snowflakes immediately swirling into her car. "My car won't start," she said, her voice shaking from cold and exhaustion. "I'm a nurse here. Just finished my shift, and I can't get my phone to work in this storm." Bear took one look at her condition, a euro, heavily pregnant, exhausted, trapped in a blizzard, a euro, and made a decision that would change everything. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sarah Martinez." "Well, Sarah Martinez, I'm Bear, and you're not spending another minute out here in this cold. You're coming with me." Sarah hesitated. Everything she'd been taught about stranger danger screamed warnings. But something in Bear's eyes, a euro, the same protective instinct she'd seen in fathers visiting their sick children, a euro, told her she was safe. "I can't ride a motorcycle. I'm 8 months pregnant." Bear was already pulling out his phone, somehow getting a signal despite the storm. "You won't have to." "Brothers, this is Bear. I need immediate assistance at Mercy General Hospital. Pregnant nurse stranded in the storm. Bring the van and every warm blanket you can find. This is a priority." Within minutes, Sarah could hear them coming. Not one motorcycle, but dozens. The rumble grew louder until it sounded like thunder rolling across the frozen landscape. What emerged from that blizzard was something Sarah would never forget. Motorcycle after motorcycle materialized through the snow, a euro 97 Hells Angels, their bikes cutting through drifts like prehistoric beasts. They came from every direction, answering Bear's call without question. But they hadn't just brought motorcycles. Behind them came pickup trucks, SUVs, and a converted van with chains on the tires and heat blasting from every vent. These weren't the dangerous criminals the media portrayed. These were mechanics and veterans, construction workers and small business owners, men and women who understood that loyalty meant everything. "Move her to the van," Bear commanded, and immediately 6 bikers formed a human shield around Sarah's car, blocking the wind while others helped her to the warm vehicle. Maven, a 6-8-year-old grandmother who'd been riding with the Angels for 30 years, wrapped Sarah in heated blankets she'd brought from home. "There you go, honey," she said, her voice maternal and soothing. "You're safe now." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "Why are you all helping me?" "Because that's what family does," said Diesel, a massive man whose calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he helped adjust her seat. "And every child deserves to be born safe and warm." Sarah learned that Bear had been riding past the hospital after visiting his own mother, who was a patient in the cardiac unit. He'd taken the back roads to avoid highway closures and happened to see her stranded car. But what happened next wasn't chance, a euro. It was the Brotherhood in action. "Hospital won't let us all inside," Bear said, settling into the driver's seat. "But they'll let one guardian angel through. And that's what you've got now, Sarah, a guardian angel who happens to ride a Harley." As the van pulled up to the emergency entrance, Sarah realized something remarkable was happening. The other 96 bikers weren't leaving. They were forming a perimeter around the hospital, their bikes creating a protective barrier against the storm. They were staying until they knew she was safe. Inside the hospital, the night staff couldn't believe what they were seeing. Bear, this intimidating biker with tattoos covering his arms, spoke to nurses with respectful gentleness. He waited in the family area while Sarah was examined, his massive frame looking almost comical in the tiny plastic chairs. Dr. Rachel Kim, the attending physician, found Bear in the waiting room 3 hours later. "Are you family?" she asked. "I am now," Bear replied simply. "Sarah and the baby are fine." She was showing early signs of hypothermia, and the stress could have triggered premature labor. "You probably saved 2 lives tonight." Bear's tough exterior cracked for just a moment. "Can I see her?" When he entered Sarah's room, she was sitting up in bed, color returned to her cheeks, one hand resting on her belly. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "The baby's okay," she whispered. "Because of you." Bear cleared his throat, suddenly emotional. Doc says you were pretty close to hypothermia. What were you planning to do if I hadn't shown up? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I've been on my own for so long, I guess I forgot what it felt like to have someone care. That's when Bear made a promise that would change both their lives. You're not alone anymore. Not ever again. Over the next few hours, as the storm raged outside, Sarah and Bear shared their stories. She learned that this fearsome biker was actually a decorated Marine veteran who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He'd lost his own son in a car accident 5 years. Earlier, a little boy who would have been about the age of the children Sarah cared for in the pediatric ICU. That's why I was visiting my mom tonight, Bear explained. Anniversary of Kevin's death. Always ride alone that night, just to think. But maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe Kevin sent me to find you. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that broke Bear's heart wide open. I've been so scared about doing this alone. Not just tonight, but everything. Raising a child, being enough for him. She gestured to her belly. I know it's a boy. I was going to name him David after my father. But maybe David Kevin Martinez wouldn't be a terrible name. Bear's eyes filled with tears he hadn't shed in 5 years. You don't have to do anything alone anymore, Sarah. I meant what I said. Outside, the Brotherhood kept their vigil. They'd taken shifts through the night, some going home to get supplies, others bringing coffee and food. By dawn, word had spread through the community. Local businesses started sending donations. The story of 97 bikers protecting a pregnant nurse had captured the city's imagination. But it was what happened next that truly shocked everyone. 3 days later, Sarah was released from the hospital. She expected to take a taxi home to her empty apartment and figure out how to get her car fixed on her nurse's salary. Instead, she walked outside to find Bear waiting with a surprise that left her speechless. Not only had the Hells Angels gotten her car running with a new battery, but they'd done something extraordinary. They'd spent the past 3 days transforming her apartment. When Sarah walked through her front door, she found a complete nursery set up in her spare room, a Euro crib, changing table, rocking chair, everything painted in soft blues and whites. How did you? She began. Turns out we've got some pretty handy brothers, Bear said, gesturing around the room. Diesel does construction. Tank's an electrician. Phoenix runs an upholstery business. And Maven, well, she's got more baby stuff stored up than Toys R Us. But the real surprise was in the kitchen. Stacked on her counter were envelopes, a Euro, dozens of them. Cards from hospital staff, from the biker community, from strangers who'd heard her story. Inside each one was money, gift cards, baby supplies. The community had rallied around one of their own. I can't accept all this, Sarah protested, overwhelmed. You're not accepting charity, Bear said firmly. You're accepting family. There's a difference. That's when Sarah understood. These people, a Euro, this brotherhood she'd feared from news stories and stereotypes, a Euro. They'd seen her not as a burden or a victim, but as someone worth protecting. Someone worth fighting for. 2 months later, when David Kevin Martinez was born, the hospital had never seen anything like it. The maternity ward parking lot was filled with motorcycles. The waiting room was packed with leather-clad angels, some pacing nervously, others quietly knitting baby blankets. When Bear was allowed in to meet the baby, he held little David with the same gentle care he'd once shown his own son. And for the first time in 5 years, he felt complete. Today, 3 years later, Sarah Martinez Thompson works part-time at the pediatric ICU and part-time managing the books for Hells Angels Automotive, the custom bike shop Bear opened with his brothers. David Kevin is a happy, healthy toddler who calls 97 bikers uncle and aunt, and who will grow up knowing that family isn't always about blood, a Euro. Sometimes it's about people who show up when you need them most. Every December, on the anniversary of that blizzard, the Hells Angels hold a charity ride for single mothers. They've raised over $200,000 in 3 years, helping women who find themselves in situations like Sarah once faced. The event is called Angel Riders, and it's become one of the forest city's most beloved traditions. Sarah and Bear were married last spring in a ceremony that made headlines a euro, not because of scandal, but because of joy. The wedding photos show a bride in white surrounded by bridesmaids in leather, and a groom whose tears of happiness were unashamed and beautiful. He saved my life that night, Sarah tells people. But what I didn't know was that I saved his too. When asked about that December night, Bear's response is simple. Sarah needed help. David needed protecting. That's what family does a euro. We show up. Doesn't matter if you've known someone for 5 minutes or 50 years. When someone needs you, you answer the call. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that heroes come in all forms and that kindness can appear from the most unexpected places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more true stories of compassion and courage. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been helped by a stranger when you needed it most? Your story matters more than you think. That night, as Sarah tucks David into bed, she can hear the distant rumble of motorcycles on the highway. Not a sound of danger anymore, but a melody of protection a euro, the knowledge that somewhere out there, guardian angels wear leather jackets and keep their promises. And in garages across the city, 250 Hells Angels sleep peacefully, knowing they kept faith with something bigger than themselves. They prove that brotherhood isn't about rebellion or reputation a euro. It's about showing up when someone needs you, no matter the storm. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.